Hello everybody, I am Jmulls of Jmulls Gaming, and it's time to give my final thoughts, my final impressions on Persona 3 Reload Episode Aigis. Quite possibly, in my opinion, the most polarizing piece of Persona content out there. And I'm talking about the answer overall, the Fez version and Episode Aigis. Now, I knew the broad brush strokes of what happened here, because in the past I had seen some, YouTube compilations of Persona 3 Fez and the answer, so I knew certain things. Spoiler warning for the rest of this video, by the way. And I will say, I enjoyed Episode Aigis more than I thought I would, but that's not saying too much. Now, my experience with Persona 3 overall has been one of continued upward trajectory. I initially watched highlighted playthroughs of Fez back in the day, before I had access to a playable version of Persona 3, or one that I really wanted to play because my PS3 setup would be absolutely borked right now. That and I accidentally deleted my copy. Yeah, that's a whole other story. But then I eventually managed to play Persona 3 Portable, and I thought it was pretty dang good, but it didn't blow me away or anything like that, and then I fell in love with the storytelling in Reload. Episode Aigis, to me, I really like the story and the narrative going on with it. But it's the gameplay that I take issue with. And I want to talk about this because this has been one hell of a year for Atlus. You start with Persona 3 Reload, we don't need to talk about Tactica, and I think Reload is a great remake of the original P3. I have my issues with it. I think it should have included FemC. I think the answer / Episode Aigis should have been there in the base game, 1000%, but the product that was there with Persona 3 Reload, in my opinion, was really dang good. We have Episode Aigis, and now we have Metaphor ReFantazio, which I can't wait to dive into. However, Episode Aigis, to me, has a few major pitfalls, and I think your reaction, your perception to Episode Aigis will be based around a couple of things. 1. Do you enjoy Persona 3 Reload's gameplay loop? 2. Do you really like Aigis? Now, I really enjoy the Reload gameplay loop, and Aigis is my favorite character in all of Persona. And it's because of those two factors that Episode Aigis, for me, is higher than, say, bottom of the barrel. But there's a few factors going for Episode Aigis that I think are massive pitfalls. 1 is the pacing, 2 is repetition, 3 is the delivery system of Episode Aigis. Let's talk about the pacing. Realistically here, if I showed you those beginning scenes of Episode Aigis leading into you going into the first door of the Abyss of Time, I skip the entirety of the Abyss of Time, and we pick right back up after you finish Empyrean, and I show you the rest of that game, realistically, how much are you actually missing out? You can argue, well, what about those memory scenes for certain members of C's? And you would be right. My retort to that would be, they're nice to have, but personally they didn't move the needle for me or anything, and I never viewed them to be wholly necessary for any specific character. The closest one I would argue would be maybe Ken, and the Mitsuru one where she's a child and she awakens to her persona. It's those two, and the others are just kind of there for me. But to me, the bulk of the interesting aspects and portions of this narrative are relegated to the end. Now, those elements, in my opinion, are really good. I went into Episode Aigis expecting not to like the story. But, much like my tale with Reload on the whole, when I see it in context, when I see it in its natural environment, with all the build-up and the proper pacing and all these cutscenes, I came to actually really like it. For the longest time, I always thought Makoto turning into a door was the dumbest thing ever, and they should have just had him die and not be a door or anything like that. There's still some part of me that leans in that direction, but when I see it in the context of everything else, again with all the proper pacing and the storytelling Episode Aigis has, I think I'm fine with it. I wouldn't say I'm in love with that story beat personally, but I would say that I think it's okay. But the part of Episode Aigis that I really love is with the members of C's. The way I always talk about this on stream is that I view Persona 3 to be one of the best breakdowns of human reaction and perception of death in all of gaming. In the base game, when you play as Makoto, he is meant to be the self-insert protagonist. That is not a con, it's a narrative device. Because they want to put you in the role of Makoto, to see the game through his eyes and to feel the game with his hands. You see everyone around you experience death, whether that be the death of a dream, the death of a concept, the death of a person, past, present, future. Maybe they're dealing with death from the distant past, or they're dealing with death in the moment, like Akihiko with Shinji, same with Mitsuru, or they're dealing with death in the future, like Akinari. You have characters dealing with the death of dreams, like some of the social links, and the whole game is you essentially being this like guiding hand to help everyone realize that the meaning of life, besides friendship, is living life to the fullest and being as happy as you can and maximizing your time here and with the time you have left. And if you have experienced that tragedy, you have experienced that loss, being able to find the strength to continue on. It can hurt and it will hurt, but you can still get back on your feet and live for tomorrow. Persona 3 tackles this idea from a whole host of different angles, and it does a great job at tackling that. And the kicker of it all is that at the end of the game, you kind of find out that you're just like Akinari. You were on the clock this entire time. You willingly sacrifice yourself so that everyone else has a tomorrow. And the game dies, and it's a really bittersweet ending because everyone else managed to kind of get the happy ending. They managed to live to tell the tale. And while you, as Makoto, die, you also finish the game. And there's an interesting poetic metaphor going on there between Makoto's life and the game itself, because when the game ends, Makoto dies. But you feel fulfilled because you had all these happy memories with this game. It was a great game where you met a bunch of great characters. They all grew and developed over the course of the game, and realistically, when you take a step back and you close your eyes for the final time at the end of the game, you lived life to the fullest in this game. So even though you die, you lived a good life. And then Episode Aigis comes in, and an initial impression, when you have a story that deals with death in that way, you would expect the moment Makoto dies to be the end of it, because that would be the poetic end. The story ends when you end. But they don't do that. With Episode Aigis, sure, it has its faults, but the beautiful poetry going on here is you essentially are able to view your own funeral in a way. You deal with the characters closest to you, that being the members of SEES, and especially Aigis, react to your death. It's like those scenes in anime or in other shows where the guy who dies is able to come back as a ghost and watch his own funeral. Because that's essentially what Episode Aigis is. All these characters have to cope with the loss and the pain of you, because the idea of Makoto is that he's a self-insert for you. So that these characters have to essentially struggle desperately to find their way back on their feet to cope with the death of you, not Narukami. There's a beautiful poetry here, in my opinion. And I know some people take issue with characters like Aigis or like Yukari in the DLC, because honestly, in my opinion, those two are kind of the stars of the show. Because some people view their characterization in Episode Aigis to be a backtracking to what they already came to understand in the base game. Because they both already dealt with death, they already had their own narrative arc. Aigis learned to go from being a machine to being a human, but with Episode Aigis, she about faces it. She goes back to trying to be just a machine. And while some people will view this as a character assassination, to me, it's Persona 3 doing what Persona 3 does well, being an expert at portraying human reaction to death. Because you may know that it's going to happen, and even if it comes unexpectedly, the logical part of your brain may understand what it has to do, what it has to think, that it has to carry on, it has to step into tomorrow, it has to be willing to pick itself back up and keep on going and not to be tied down in the past. But sometimes, especially when that death hits closest to home, no matter and no amount of logical, rational thinking will overcome the emotional damage you sustain. And in my opinion, Yukari distancing herself from everyone else and just trying to escape the pain until she gets this one opportunity, this one little modicum of hope that maybe she can go back in time and change things, and she grasps onto that because the pain of losing Makoto is too much. She knows what she has to do. She knows she has to pick up and go to tomorrow. She just can't. That's a very human reaction, in my opinion, because people aren't logical all the time. And when we look at Aigis herself, the reason she was able to go from viewing herself as just a machine to someone almost borderline alive at the end of P3 was because of Makoto. He was like the one main thread connecting her to life. But when that rope was severed, she just fell into that abyss. Once again, chasing desperately after the one person who grounded her. Does the UI and like the whole theme that they did in the promotional art for Persona 3 and in that intro movie make a lot more sense? She's diving back under the water to get Makoto, who's just out of reach, because to her, that's all she has. And in episode Aigis, she has to learn to be able to let go and to find new things and new reasons to keep on. So she reverts back to a machine because this is her first real tragedy, her first real death that she experiences, and it's to the person closest to her, the person most important to her. Again, in my opinion, a very, very human reaction to this, where she wants to escape it all. She felt for the longest time in episode Aigis that her being human was the source of this pain. She didn't feel it when she was just a machine because she was just a machine. She wanted to revert back to that. And the goal of episode Aigis is to get her back on the right path. Because normally people don't fall just once, they fall multiple times and they have to get back on the right path time and time again. It's a very human reaction in my opinion. That's what it makes the story of episode Aigis so compelling to me. It's these characters that should know better, that do know better, but they just simply can't do better. Because at the end of the day, they're just simply human, and there's nothing wrong with that. There were multiple times in the base story that the Civil War arc would have happened back there. But Makoto, being the charismatic leader, was able to get them all on the right path, like herding a group of sheep. But without the shepherd, that first moment we have friction in episode Aigis, they revert back to butting heads. And it comes to a head, and they fight. And it goes to show just how important of a character Makoto was, because when he was around, that wouldn't have happened. And some people can say, oh, that shows how weak the members of SEES are, and kinda, yeah, that's the point. They're still growing, they're still maturing, if that makes sense. And like the big takeaway from episode Aigis is that they are now able to internalize these lessons, so they don't have to learn them again down the line. They're no longer reliant on Makoto, and they manage to learn to let go, and to walk into tomorrow, and to be willing and able to move on. Remember how I said Makoto is supposed to be a self-insert protagonist? In a way, it's also assurance, and yeah, like we all know this is just a video game, but you kind of have to go with me here. There's like this subconscious feeling here where it's like, okay, these characters will be fine from here on out. They no longer need us, the player. I think it's a beautiful message. Having said that, I talked about the pros here. Let's talk about the cons, because I think episode Aigis has quite a few. 1. Holy God, is it a grind. Going from the base game, I'm not even that big of a fan of Tartarus, but at least it was spaced out and intermixed with a bunch of storytelling and a bunch of character moments. The balancing between those elements and the Abyss of Time in episode Aigis is all out of whack in my opinion, and it makes the Abyss of Time feel monotonous, slow, boring, and ultra repetitive. Because those memories that we get intermittently just aren't enough for me, and they don't do enough to really move the needle for me with any one of those memories. There's a couple decent ones, but none that blew me away. And they do the old Mario thing where like your princess is in another castle, but with the ghost of Makoto. Feel like he's trying to play a Daughtry song. You're the ghost of me! Gee, I wonder who that is. Who could that be? I wonder where he's going. Just over and over and over and over again and over again, dude. I think they just needed to spread these moments out a bit more, and maybe like these story moments out a bit more, and it would be better in my opinion. They try to do something with these like Link-esque episodes you can get by finding certain items in the Abyss of Time, and you go back to the dorm, and you can hang out with these characters. Again, none of these do much for me, and for me, the beauty of episode Aigis isn't until the start of the Civil War arc, or the very beginning of the DLC. The grind fest that was the Abyss of Time, I'm not a fan of. It's not for me. I think enemy variety is severely lacking, especially near the end. I did play on Heartless, by the way, which for the most part was easier than I thought it would be, but I also made a super powerful Siegfried with crit stats out the booty hole. It's actually kind of insane, the build I had. I can't say I was too big a fan of boss design either, especially with the final boss. He was just kind of gimmicky. He pretty much just summoned a black ball. You had to do enough damage to interrupt him, and he just repeated that over and over again. I eventually managed to get him down with 2 Armageddons. I will say, episode Aigis does the annoying thing where in the Civil War arc, because they try to make these fights tough, the main thing I couldn't stop thinking about, though, was that these characters are doing way better than when they're in my party. It was kind of funny because on stream throughout all of P3 and P3 Reload, I would always rag on Akihiko and Ken, because I always benched them. So whatever they talked about, I would, like, yell at them to quit talking, get back on the bench, warm it for me, please, and stuff like that. And they were the ones that gave me the hardest time. Oh my god, it was simply because their Theurgies would one-shot Aigis every dang time, and there was, like, no warning to them. I eventually came to realize, oh, when you get to like 50% of their HP, a few turns afterwards, they'll use their Theurgy. And then for the second guy, it's like the 25% HP mark. Took me the longest time to realize because there would be like no warning, and I would be doing good. I would be cooking them. And then they'd just be like, okay, screw you, you're dead, restart. Hauntless be hauntless, though. I did select the difficulty. But yeah, Episode Aigis to me is something that I'm glad I experienced once. I will probably never replay it, though. The Abyss of Time is a somehow even more poorly paced Tartarus to me. It's repetitive, and I just didn't enjoy it all that much. I do really like Persona 3 Reload combat, so I at least had that going for it. But for $35, because they bundled this into the expansion pass and you couldn't get it separately, so they threw it together with a few songs just to try and justify the price of it being $35. I wouldn't recommend it unless you desperately want to play it. The way I did it was I just got a month of Game Pass Ultimate and got it that way, which would be the recommendation for me if you want to try this thing out. But like I said, there's some cool stuff with the story in my opinion. I'm glad I experienced it once. I don't know how much I can actually recommend it though, because it is a big ask for gameplay that is pretty much repetitive and just a worse version of what was there in the base game. I like Metis though, I'll say that. I know I haven't really talked about her. I didn't mind the whole sister thing. I think she was a good character to work with Aigis. But yeah, in my opinion, this should have just been in the base game with Reload and launch. Not only having this be separate, but being the only way to get it besides Game Pass Ultimate for a month, which isn't even a permanent deal, by the way. Being to get the expansion pass bundled together with a bunch of songs most people I can't imagine would care about. It's just one of those moments that shows Atlas is greedy, and it's like Atlas being Atlas. They make some of my favorite games, but god do they annoy me sometimes when it comes to the business decisions. I personally believe in the idea that if you're going to do a remake for a really old game, it should at least have all the content there. And I don't buy the excuse saying that with it just trying to remake base Persona 3 because you did Episode Aigis, you're not. Also, I'm fairly certain Aigis' social link was a Fez thing, not an original thing, but don't quote me on that. But yeah, my feelings about Episode Aigis is there's elements to it that I really like, and there's other elements in equal parts that I really dislike. So I think overall, I would say that it's average, and I know mid is an overused term, but like, to me, it is like a straight average thing. It's fine. And much like how I would recommend Persona 5 Tactica only to people that really love tactics games, and that really love the P5 crew and just want more of them, my recommendation for Episode Aigis would be kind of the same. It's like, I would recommend Episode Aigis only if you love Persona 3 Reload combat, and you also love the cast of P3, and you just want more time with them. Because at least the story becomes really compelling and engaging and poetic near the end, in my opinion. Also, Disconnect in the music here is just so good. Don't is such a great song, Disconnect is a great song. There's elements to it that I really like. I was never that big of a fan of the Erebus thing, or Makoto being a door. I'm a bit more receptive to it now, but it is a storyline that to me, I only really care about if there's a continuation at some point, which they have done a little bit with Persona 4 Arena. We know Elizabeth is out there trying to find a way to save Makoto. Whether they'll ever do anything with that again in the future, who knows? To me, with Episode Aigis, and I don't know if this was a thing here, a lot of the dialogue at the end of the game really felt as if they're teasing that they're going to pick this up again in the future. Maybe they will, maybe they won't, who knows? But I'm going to judge it as the product it is right now, and I think it's solidly okay. It's not particularly stellar, but I'm glad I played it, I'm glad I beat it, and now I have the moment every Persona fan fears. When you beat a Persona game, and you just have that emptiness being like, well, what the hell do I do now? Thank God they released Metaphor ReFantazio. I need a rebound. And with that, I'll call the video there for the day. Good God, I love Persona 3. It's gonna be sad to see this game go. It really will be. Thank you all for tuning in. My pleasure making the video. If you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out and help support future content, and I greatly appreciate it. Stay safe, have a great day. Leave a comment down below with who your favorite character in Persona 3 was, and what your favorite memory from Persona 3 was. I'd love to hear your thoughts and hear your opinions and hear your perspectives. Stay safe, have a great day, and let's close our eyes one final time. Bye-bye, everybody, till we meet again.